here at E2 office. Thanks everyone for coming. Hopefully this will be a valuable session for everyone. My name is Enrique. I've been with E2 for 3 years now. I started doing the technical reports as a lifecycle designer, and now I'm running the business development for WA. And we've been doing a lot of work with local governments in regards to using the life cycle design methodology to support the sustainability criteria and the planning policies. So that's what we're hoping to share with you today and with everyone that's connected online. Make sure I get everyone. If you could please, everyone that is online, um, keep your microphones muted so we avoid any noise refeed, please. Okay. Idea is general cover the environmental performance of buildings, what local governments have been doing on that space, look at some of the concepts of life cycle design for those who haven't heard about it before, and talk about performance-based solution, how we can set performance instead of using prescriptive methods, and look at some case studies, companies that have been using this methodology, some success stories, and yeah, the most important thing at the end, leave some good time for discussion. So we're 15 minutes late. Apologize for who's connected online, but the presentation should run for another 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and then we'll have some good time for a group discussion. So the basics, what's we're trying to achieve, how can we find balance to take good care of the planet at the same time the planet can take good care of us. So when we break it down into the three, the bottom line, the environmental is the focus that we're talking about here today. When we run our assessments, we do look at some financial aspects of the designs, not so much on the social, but I guess a good design also means a good comfort, a good well-being. So it does have some social aspects related to it, but we don't have social indicators, if you like. And so the main focus will be the environment and how to improve that. So when we're looking at the biggest issue we've got at the moment, and climate change is obviously the most important one. That's why E2 exists, and that's what we're trying to solve. And we look at this global map of emissions per person per year, and we see Australia as one of the top emitters per person in the world at around 20 tons, 25 tons. And yeah, we need to bring it right down to at least 1 ton per person per year to achieve a sustainable level. Well, that's a drastic change. There's a lot of things to change, and we have a budget. We have to be careful with what we are designing and how we're living our lives in general. But yeah, we need to find ways and metrics to quantify these things and make sure we are following that budget that we've got. And of course, buildings, they're really important. That's why low carbon buildings, or even better, zero carbon buildings, are the way to go. Usually 35% of the impacts are associated with the built form. So there's a huge opportunity for us to, as designers, as consultants, as planning officers, to help solve this issue. This local government have been using planning policies as part of a standard planning policy, as well as part of the exercise for variation to developments. So, for example, City of Canning, they're looking at adopting life cycle methodology as part of their standard policy for development approvals. But they also have sustainability requirements when they're giving a density bonus, for example. So when it's exercised for discretion of variation. Apologize, this slide is out of format here, but there's a recent bulletin issued by the Planning Commission. I don't know if everyone saw it. It's just the WA Planning Commission supporting local governments to have their own policies and criteria to achieve good building design, and the criteria could vary from quality of the design, the type of the dwelling, sustainability and energy efficiency. One of the criteria, the focus that we're talking about here today. So this is something that's happening a lot at the moment. Experience we've had with City of Fremantle and City of Vincent shows that there's a lot going on, and local governments are taking the responsibility to and having the support to develop their work. If you'd like to complement with anything, feel free. If not, we'll continue. Yeah.
Continue.
Yeah. Okay. So I use an example here from City of Vincent. This is one of the slides from Anita on her presentation. So they mention about a sustainability requirement to achieve the density bonus. So a development that is going for extra story or extra 2 stories, they will have to meet certain criteria in terms of different design principles, and one of them is sustainability and design quality. So City of Vincent requires that the design significantly exceeds the statutory minimum, and that is recognized by the council. So each local government will have its own criteria and policies. And they're also planning to expand it to not only to additional height, but also to plot ratio. So it's something that's been working. They've been getting good outcomes with developers, with the community, so they're adopting that further. Another example is the City of Melville for the Canning Bridge. The new structure plan, it's a noble area. They're requiring the developments, the multi-residential developments, to achieve 6-star, Green Star equivalent or rating or equivalent. So it's very difficult. I don't think we have, I don't know, Pras, I don't think we have a 6-star residential building in Australia.
We've got 1 4-star in WA.
Yeah. So it's something that the councils they use Green Star because it's already a standard that's been out there. It works but sometimes there's a lot of difficulties to implement that system, and developers will have barriers to achieve that compliance. So what we found is that the life cycle methodology has really suited that gap, or it's good support for this requirement. Especially, for example, the City of Melville, we used life cycle methodology as part of the equivalency to Green Star. So it's one option that the council is looking at, but they have to understand how it works, how it compares. Are we really getting good buildings? How green is this building that we're proposing? So it's all part of that education process, and everyone is adopting more and more of this methodology. So like I said, the City of Vincent has been really progressive with adopting life cycle design methodology. They've used on various, probably over 10 of their developments have been assessed through this methodology. It's not something proprietary from E2, it's just a methodology. Any life cycle practitioner can conduct this assessment. That's the important thing about it as well. So other councils have been looking at it as well. City of Canning and City of Fremantle and City of Melville. So the process consists of setting a performance target right at the beginning of the project. So developers, they approach the life cycle assessment practitioner and say, we have a development here that's either going for discretion of variation, development variation, and we need to prove this is a good building. Can you help us out? And then that's the earlier we get involved, the better to set a target. So usually a council will have a target of what is a good building for them, how much they're expecting to save in terms of carbon emissions for that specific area. Is it totally, completely carbon neutral? That's what we hope. That's what we work for. But there are implications with that. So they will set a target, for example, 60% better than the current benchmark. So once the council has defined that target, we'll then run a preliminary assessment and say how well this building rates at, prior to DA, and then we'll work through the detailed design to make sure the building will achieve that target that was set previously. So that's the process. We'll look at the process in a bit more details along the presentation.
Sorry, okay.
Yeah.
Question. So you've gone through that process with those 4 councils. Have they all been relatively consistent in what they've deemed to be the equivalents?
It varies. Yeah, they all have different requirements depending on the region. So, for example, the city of Vincent, they've set the target to be 50%, just one specific target. City of Canning, they will vary. They still work in progress. It hasn't been defined yet. The city of Vincent is the one that we have most work with. So the other ones are still work in progress. But it will vary depending on the region and depending on the criteria they have. And yeah,
it's a real learning experience. So, like, obviously, we go in on behalf of. It might sound a bit lanky, but we go on behalf of the planet. So we're pushing the zero carbon outcomes, right? So when we talk to a council, we're unashamedly saying, look, this is what we'd like you to do. Council say that's great, but the developer is going to walk away from building in this area if you push that hard. What's a reasonable figure to push for? And then you kind of start bargaining to a certain degree. What we try and do is work on the developer side as well and say, look, this isn't about trying to hit that minimum target. Let's use this, as a positive in your design process and see if we can go above that and actually get you a better outcome in your sales and your marketing and your branding and so on and so forth. And if you work together like that, then you generally get a fair bit more ahead. I mean, there's one in the city of Canning that they've said they're going to hit zero carbon. It may be the first big multi-resi / multi-use building that we know of in WA anyway, maybe even Australia, that will hit zero carbon. It wasn't done through going and telling the city of Canning you must make them go zero carbon. It was a bit of both. We went to the city of Canning, then went to the developer and kind of talked it all up into a frenzy, and then the developer said, right, we'll go zero carbon. And you're like, shit, you really mean that? They're like, yeah, we're going to do it. We're now they're just getting into the detailed design process, so hopefully they stick with it. But so there's your first question is it consistent? And no, but I think the more we do of it, the more consistency we're getting, and more importantly, we're learning what works and what doesn't. I might be jumping ahead a bit in discussion, but to be totally transparent, we've had it go wrong. We've worked with a developer who managed to sneak through the system with a pretty crappy building, and it wasn't good for us because we were kind of working for the developer, and fortunately that local government could see what had happened and we didn't get a bad rep, or more importantly the approach to the life cycle assessment didn't get a bad rep. But yeah, the things that can go wrong, but we learned from that one, and hence when we approached City of Melbourne with this last time, we straight up said, look, don't let them do this. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, cool. So we fixed that a bit, but each one we do, it gets better and better.
Yeah, Yeah, the importance for us is just to how can we get to the happy planet? How can we set, if we're setting targets, how can we set good targets that will really get good buildings? So it will depend on specific situation, but we have metrics to quantify these things and look at how buildings perform, especially on environmental performance and looking at carbon. That's what we focus here into. We have other environmental indicators as well. When we run the assessments, you can look at different impact indicators as toxicity or land use or eutrophication, depletion of the ozone layer. It's all these different indicators that we assess on and we look at them. But the first one and the priority is always carbon from our point of view, and that seems to be the consensus as well. So the way we measure environmental sustainability of buildings is using life cycle assessment. So life cycle assessment is a methodology that will first of all quantify all the impacts, and then we will compare. So for buildings, we will compare against a benchmark or NCC compliant building, and then we'll provide recommendations to improve. So it's always a three-stage process: is to quantify, compare, and improve. And that methodology can be done for anything from a product to a service, but we apply that to buildings. And specifically in regards to buildings, there's a European standard. So there's a calculation method for looking at a building and looking at the scope, setting the boundaries, defining the process, which is the EN 15978. So that is today, that's the really cool that exists, and that sets the whole guidelines for what good building is. Fortunately, we developed a software that is compliant to that standard. It's not that we created anything, we're just providing a calculation method through the software following the EN 15978 standard. And I just thought it was important to mention this standard because this is a collaboration, international collaboration of I think it's 28 European countries. So it's a good technical know-how from people all over the world defining what sustainability of buildings is, and the setting the guidelines to help us as software developers, as consultants, as designers to apply this concept. So you can see in the bottom there all the same members, all different countries. It's a little bit small, but I thought it was important just to mention and give a little bit of emphasis on the standard. And the structure, the core of the standard is to run a life cycle assessment. So that's what it is. You have to run a life cycle assessment to find your results. And that is very interesting, the process. Well, I've been involved with it too, like I said, for the past 3 years, and I see a lot of this happening as I was working here, especially with Green Star. So when you have standards like this that sets the guidelines, it's really helpful for rating schemes to incorporate these standards. So before we didn't have these standards, so it was really good to have the rating systems setting prescriptive methods. Like you have to have this, and that in order to get a good building, and they'll give you a formula where you have to comply with all those items, and then therefore you get a good building on a prescriptive method. But with the advance of the standards and with the performance-based approach, we can set targets. We can look at what is the target in terms of carbon for this building. Is it zero carbon, or is it zero? What's the target for water use, for example? How many kiloliters per person per year? It doesn't matter what the design team does, as long as we reach that target. It gives a lot more flexibility to the design team. The overall result is better. So it's a progress that's happening all the rating schemes, they're now incorporating a life cycle design into their standards. So Green Star now has a credit for running life cycle design as part of the certification process. Same with LEED, DGNB in Germany. The core of their rating system is a life cycle assessment. So, for example, all the materials credits, all the operational energy credits, all the functionality, everything just fits into the LCA, and that's how they rate the buildings. So I think we see that as happening, within the other rating schemes as well. I thought I'll quickly jump through the software here to show you, see how I go with this, but it's just to show what the software does. Software is online, so it's on the internet, it's open use. If you're using for education purpose or research, you don't have to pay. So it's really good to useful for running preliminary reviews on projects, and if you do have a commercial intention with the results, then it goes through e-tool services and certification. But I thought I'll quickly show you the benchmark. So when we run, for example, a residential building, the local council, we compare that to the benchmark, which is a MCC compliant building with current technologies, the system efficiencies for air conditioning, lighting, all that feeds into the benchmark. And this is the number here. We're looking at 4,220 kilograms per person per year. I know this is a little bit abstract, hard to, what is 4,000 kilograms of carbon? Is it a lot? It's hard to imagine and to feel, but I think it's important for us to start getting those numbers and feel for those numbers, because that's what we are comparing against. So when we say a 50% better than the benchmark, we're talking about 2,000 kilograms per occupant per year. So this is where we look at where the impacts are. So for example, you can see there's a summary chart here showing the majority of the impacts are on energy use. Of course, here in Australia, because we are on such carbon intensity grid, 70%, 75% of the impacts associated with operational energy. But we do have a lot of impacts associated with products, the recurring impacts, some other impacts with water, end of life. So when we want to start improving these buildings, we know where to focus, and that's the idea with the tool. This is EN 15978 format and scope. I think because we are running the video conference, the software is a little bit slow because it runs online. But here you can see how it breaks it down in different stages, from materials to use. Materials, you go from product to transportation and construction, use, or the operational use of that building, end of life, what happens when that building gets demolished, and also benefits beyond the building boundaries. So this is what the software produces following the international standards that I mentioned before. I won't spend too much time on the software because I don't want to get too boring. I know we're only us that run the software that likes it. Not everyone likes it, getting into the details, but I thought it was important just to show everyone how it looks like. So yeah, the methodology will look at two main components, which is the life cycle impacts, looking at all the stages of a building, from materials to transportation, construction, use, maintenance, and end of life. But very important, and most important, the functionality. That's where we focus all the attention to, because that's where we get the biggest benefits, is increasing functionality of buildings. There's no point of us building or getting a a good rate on a sustainable mansion, that you will have only 2 people living on it. Same with for an office building. If we get a really good office building, but it's not providing enough space for people to work at, there's no point. So that's where functionality comes in, and it's applicable to any type of buildings. And we are talking mainly about residential here because that's where we've been working with local governments, but it can be replicated to different building types. And in regards to functionality, for example, we look at metrics. For example, what is the net dwellable area compared to the gross floor area? So if we have an apartment building that has a lot of common area, a lot of car park, and not a lot of habitable area, it's not a really good design, is it? Because we have a lot of energy to maintain car parks and corridors and entries and all that. So we need to find ways to optimize that. That's optimizing functionality. Examples, like I said, reducing car parks, or even optimizing getting the same number of car bays in a smaller, using stackers, or using diagonal parking, and optimizing common areas, splitting. Maybe sometimes you get 2 sets of stairs instead of 1 long corridor, and then you get more dwellable area. So you end up increasing the sales value of a project as well. Not always increasing the functionality will increase in costs. Most of the time, is increasing functionality will reduce costs. How can we optimize the structure? The structure of a building, and reduce the thickness of a slab, for example, changing the columns and all that, and then you reducing the amount of cement and concrete. So therefore, optimizing the performance per occupant per year. It's all to do with increasing functionality and efficiency. There's a really interesting document on our website that I'll quickly show you as well, but I won't spend too much time on it because it's long, but I think it's important to mention to you. So if you have some interest, just jump on the website and look for it. It's basic guidelines for multi-residential buildings. And we put this together after looking at so many buildings, and they all have similar basic concepts that is applicable to every building. So the idea is how can we bring, this is, so tons of CO2 emissions per occupant per year. Like I said, the base design is around 4 tons, so 4,000 kilograms. How can we bring 4,000 kilograms to zero? What we need to do, what are the basic elements? And then here we have a combination of increasing functionality, picking the low-hanging fruits first, but also using some renewables and some increase in efficiencies on systems and stuff. Just quickly show you, for example, some initiatives and what impacts they have. Hot water usually will have a large impact on multi-residential developments. Sometimes a lot of focus is on thermal performance, cross-flow ventilation, orientation, insulation. It's important to get a good thermal comfort, but because we already have the 6-star minimum requirement for thermal performance, there are other areas even more important to look at. And you see that the hot water will get us 25-30% savings. If we improve lighting, there's a good opportunity for lighting automation with sensors, lux sensors, timing controls, and so.
Might be just worth clarifying too, there, Nicky, that the design guidelines there for the average Australian climate. So here in Perth, we set out the Goldilocks climate for solar passive design, and really we can live in our climate, almost most of the year without too much trouble. But if you put this set of design guidelines into Tasmania, or somewhere in the north of North America, then thermal performance would be a much bigger component of that. So,
Well pointed.
It's an important thing to note that you find that there's no silver bullet here. There's no one size fits all, and every location, every type of building has its own hotspots and low-hanging fruit. And that's another nice thing about life cycle design, is it doesn't just pick certain elements and say that's what you have to fix. It looks at it all very objectively, and the exact same principles that we apply here in Perth for life cycle design are exact same principles that you apply to someone running a life cycle assessment of a building in Seattle or Vancouver or wherever it is. It very objectively identifies this stuff and helps to deal with it.
Yeah, there'll always be surprise, always be something that even the most expert would, For example, this is just happening at the moment, and it's the project that we're working together on the stadium, that they have different targets for different stages of the project. And one of the target is a construction target. So they have to achieve a 10% improvement, something on the construction stage, and then they have to achieve 15% improvement on the operational energy stage. But when we recommend to put a big solar PV on the stadium, it will influence the construction stage because you have a lot of carbon embodied to your system. So how can we, there's always things to look at and to discover and to discuss, and the methodology is always assisting us with numbers and showing where the impacts are, and that's the good thing about it from my personal point of view, I guess. So yeah, this is worth having a look at, but it talks a lot about the increasing functionality. How can you design your building for optimum PV? Design your roof for optimum PV installation. It goes into the functionality that we talked about. So for example, the ratio that we mentioned, if we increase the ratio of dwellable area to gross floor area from 50% to 80%, you're already achieving a 14% improvement on your building. You're not changing, you're not talking about low carbon materials, you're not talking about LED lighting, you're just talking about functionality. You're just improving your building by using good design, good architecture, good quality design.
That's something that's I was about to talk about car parks, which is it's something that you don't, you surprise a lot of developers with when you say let's have a look at car park design, because they go, no, you're here to tell me about recycled materials and orientation, and the first thing we'll do is look at the functionalities, and Nikki's pointed out, and there's so often you look at a car park and you're like, who designed this thing? Unfortunately, no one really focuses too much on the car park because it's not particularly visual or exciting for someone to optimise, but there's some super low-hanging fruit with sorting out car park efficiency, from construction costs and materials and so on, all the way through to the venting and the lighting. If you can, do some innovative stuff there, you can have some huge savings. And it never shows up in the green rating systems that you've made your car park design more efficient, but it definitely does in the life cycle design. In fact, one of the first things we'll be looking at.
Yeah. Just thought it was worth mentioning these guidelines. Just jumping back on the presentation here. Just double check if we got any. Okay, looks like if there's any issue with people that are connected online, just send me a chat, or if you have questions as well, feel free to send a chat, and then we'll replicate your question here. So the idea is to give you the opportunity to participate as well. It's good to know it's all good so far. We'll continue. I'll show some case studies and projects that have been successful and have achieved good.
This is through the internet, so I can't turn it off.
Hi.
Oh, now it's gone.
Hi, I got some. If you'd like to send a question, just please send me a chat, and then we'll, um, yeah, get it going for you. Because I'm afraid we'll get some audio refeed if we open for questions. So, for example, this is a building that achieved 81% improvement against the benchmark by using a good functionality and then improving the efficiency of the operational energy with covering the whole roof with solar PV. So there's a lot of input into roof space, very valuable nowadays, especially here in Australia, to optimize the use of your roof space. It's a valuable asset of your building. So this one, it was covered with solar panels and solar thermal collectors for hot water. So it's a centralized system, centralized hot water system with a gas backup, and the rest was all covered with solar PV to the point where each apartment will have a 2 kilowatt system, which is pretty good. They're all individual metered, so they all have their own benefit, but they are also when you're exporting, they are collectively exporting the energy back to the grid when there's no use. So it's good impact on the grid as well. Just helping decarbonize the grids. Intelligent building controls will be, automation, lighting, as we talked about, automation in energy monitoring. So having smart meters, like this is one of the solutions we recommend is Power Tracker. So it just clamps into your switchboard and provides you with the interface that you can look on your mobile, how much energy you're using, where the energy is going, what happens, how much energy you're using when you're out of your home or your office. Gives you a lot of valuable information, and it helps to change the behavior of occupant. So councils really like it because it drives that community awareness, and it usually gets at least 10% savings on the energy use. So it's all about, putting those systems in place, and then the occupants will flow with the environment that they are living on. This is another one. This from Handle Property Group. Interesting that this was 1 car bay per apartment. So it's again optimization of common use, using the roof space again for PV, minimizing good thermal performance or minimizing the AC use with natural ventilation and fans. Fans seems to be something from the past nowadays. We don't see them much on designs anymore, but they're great, especially here in Perth. So it's good to see designs including fans. So thought I would mention as well. So just now going back into the process, what happens? How does it work when we get, let's say, we working with the city of Fremantle, we work in a multi-residential development that is trying to achieve the design excellence. How does it work? What's the process? So the 2 different services that it tool provides depending on the project stage. And the idea is to reduce the cost for the developer when they're not sure if the project is going ahead. So prior to DA, they don't know if it's going to go through or what the sales will be like. So we just run this target setting report, which is a preliminary assessment, looking at how the building performs, pointing out where the impacts are, helping them to focus on where the biggest impacts are, and setting a target that will suffice what the requirement for the council is. So that's what's done at the concept stage, the target setting. Once it's approved, it moves into the detailed design process. We'll run the full life cycle analysis. That's when we go into the plans. We'll look at all the areas, the materials. We'll look at all the system efficiencies, air conditioning, lighting, everything, and then we'll quantify the end result and compare it to that target. So let's say we achieve a target of 60%. If the design changes along the process, it doesn't matter what they do. If they change the hot water system, or if they change the functionality, if they pull out, or if they, instead of the setback, they put more units in, but therefore they get more roof space. It doesn't matter what they do as long as they achieve that final target. That gives the design team some flexibility to improve the design, change things as it always happens, but also maintain the performance. So it's just one example of the target setting report. It's really small to see, but this is just one of the format. This is a benchmark, residential benchmark, and this is the proposed building, the base design. So it's 56% better than the benchmark. And in order to achieve this performance, there's a list of recommendations, and each recommendation will have a percentage improvement. So sometimes if you change your hot water system, we'll give you 10% improvement. If you increase your thermal performance from 6 to 7 stars, we'll give you 1 or 2% improvement. Or if you increase your solar PV, we'll give you 15% improvement. So for the developer, it's really important for them to see, okay, I want to spend $500,000 extra on this project. Where will I get the best benefit for the planet? So it helps them to prioritize where the impacts are and where the best savings will come from. Then we'll move on to the full life cycle assessment, which is a very detailed analysis. That's when you can use the results to promote for sales, for example, for your sales campaign and marketing, because we already know it's all locked in. Still, you can run the assessment during the design process, but after it's completed, we issue the certificate, then that's what's been designed. And why this is talking to local governments, why has this methodology been accepted, why they like it? There's different elements, and one of them is, I think, because it's international standard and it's regulated by a group of technical people, it's always improving. The international standards always being updated. So when you rely on that framework, that means that your policy is always constantly going to get updates and always maintain the quality. So and the relevancy. So that's one of the reasons why it's easy. So when you have to communicate the target, you just set the target. It's easy to communicate internally, also to the community, to the developers. Because it's a performance-based and technology agnostic, it doesn't matter, what building type you're using, what climatic zone. You can just adjust the target and use the methodology depending on the application. It's very flexible, and due to that flexibility and the performance-based, it just creates more opportunities for the design team to achieve the outcome, and usually result in better environment outcomes at a lower cost. So that's what we've been, like Alex was saying, this is a constant learning process. This is just happening as we are talking now. We have projects, meetings with councils, and so it's points that we have identified. But would you think of anything else, or want to complement with anything else?
No, I mean, like the last point to me is probably one of the most exciting ones when you're working in a design team that has flexibility. Quite often when we walk into projects where they're being hit over the head with a regulatory stick that they must achieve this and they must do this and they must do that and tick these boxes, you're already on the back foot. Like the developers will find problems with each one of those things that they're being asked to do. The design team will also do the same thing. Oh, we can't do that, that's too expensive. Or, we get it with solar PV. Oh, you can't do more than 5 kilowatts of PV because, they'll just keep finding problems and why you can't do this stuff. Whereas if you walk into a design team and you say, look, we have no idea how we're going to achieve this, why don't you tell us, is this a performance target? What sort of things could we do to hit that? Then suddenly they'll start bringing ideas. Like, I worked on this project and they did 150 kilowatts of PV. We could have a go at that. And it's that, concept of integrative design, which everyone talks about and no one actually does. This really facilitates it. From that early targeting study session we do, there's no rules, there's no silver bullets. It's literally, let's just throw it all on the table and people can come up with ideas and you can model it, and it will give you the performance-based outcome rather than, okay, yeah, we've done that, we can tick that box. Or who's got the cheapest points? What can we do? What's the thing that's going to get us those points the cheapest? It doesn't necessarily have a positive environmental outcome. This way, it's something quantified for that. That to me is really exciting, and it's never the same in any building. Every building's got its own nuances. I mean, for instance, like we're doing a modelling session, I was running it live in Seattle, and the guys there are really excited because they're generating all their energy on site, on the roof of their building, and it's like this big hurrah, this is fantastic. And I was modelling it on the fly, and I thought I had a glitch in the software because that wasn't helping them. What they were doing to the roof was sticking on this renewable energy wasn't really helping, and I was kind of going through it trying to pretend that the glitch wasn't there, and it's really hard when you do live software demos, and something clicked halfway through. I was like, where's your energy coming from? Where's it coming? And they're like, oh, it's all hydropower. I was like, well, that's it, You're not saving any carbon by bombing solar PV and wind turbines all over your roof. And you don't know that. Like, if you go in there saying you must do this and you must do that, you don't find those things out until it's too late. Whereas if you get to do one of these sessions right at the beginning, you can throw it all in there, see what's going to help. I mean, it happens here, we've got Kununurra. They've got more water in the Lake Argyle than know what to do with. There's no point trying to offset carbon in the operational sense in Kununurra. It's all about the materials in Kununurra. Where are you getting them from? What's embodied carbon? So that's really fun and exciting part of the design process that life cycle design really opens up for you. Too often people view it as an assessment thing that you're going to come in after and you're going to assess me and you're going to give me a number. And so, no, like, that's not what it's about. It's about starting right before you've even drawn it, because then you can talk about car park layouts and all sorts of cool stuff. So, yeah, and the first one too, I just waded into a massive online argument, which I have a nasty habit of doing more recently, about a certain rating system. And the crux of it was they created a rating system. It's an industry body funded by the industry to set the standards for the rate, for what a green building was. This was an international one overseas. And that was where they were suffering, because they let the building industry tell them what a sustainable building was. Whereas the international standards for life cycle assessment, they're not the building industry. They're people who come independently and say, totally agnostic to it, this is how you measure the outcomes. Furthermore, once they've built a rating system, they're kind of stuck with it. They can't just change tack overnight, because the whole industry has been going along with that particular direction. And if they say, no, we're not doing that anymore, we're doing something different, then you've got this massive industry suddenly gets annoyed at you, whereas life cycle assessment doesn't care. Just is what it is. The numbers are what the numbers are. They don't favour any technology or any building philosophy. Measure it, quantify it, and there you go. So that to me is another really, really exciting thing about life cycle design, is that it takes all those issues away. You're not having to constantly update things, you're not having to, another example would be solar PV. When we first started, it was a lot more expensive than it is today. So it wasn't getting up in the list of the priorities all the time. And if you went back another 10 years, the embodied carbon in solar PV was a lot higher than what it is today. 20 years ago, you wouldn't have been speccing solar PV because there was more energy going into building it than what it was producing its lifespan. But give it 10 years, the learning curve improved, suddenly it's up the top of the list now. So if you had a prescriptive rating system that didn't include that, you wouldn't know, whereas a life cycle design approach will just automatically update as new materials, new technologies come into the space, and the standards improve. That's the other nice thing. 5 years ago, when we built our first benchmark, it didn't have any solar PV on it, whereas the average roof in Australia today has solar PV on it. So when the developer says, oh, look, we're we're putting 10 kilowatts of PV on this massive apartment building. It's like, that's not even the average. We're already doing that. Sorry, like that's not helping your case. You have to go above that. So it's a nice way of that constant lifting of the bar rather than 5 years later going, oh shit, the technology's left us behind. We're going to have to recreate this rating system to catch up.
Yeah, that's interesting because we just got a question here in regards to the benchmark. How is the benchmark calculated? That's the reference that we use to set our targets. So very important that we get good benchmarks to compare against. So make sure we're always improving the end result. And that's a good question. Thanks for putting that question out. There's a lot of information about the benchmark on the website. I will explain the basics now, but I'll also send the link for future reference. So what we do is we get a compliant building in terms of the construction codes. So first we use international benchmark, residential benchmark, because we expanding E2 to Europe and Asia and Americas. It's important to get one reference, otherwise you start getting different results for similar building types. So it's important to have what is a reference building if we all want to have a quality of life. So what we did is we got the OECD countries, we look at all the buildings and we average them out in terms of population and building types for residential, for example, and the available technologies and energy use, and we came up with one residential benchmark, which is international benchmark. And interesting enough, it's very similar to the Australian benchmark. So it's on the mark of 4,000 kilograms per person per year. So we have one international benchmark. That's the one we use to run all the reports, so we can compare different performance in different parts of the world and make sure if we are building according to that benchmark, we'll then achieve a global scale savings. You're not changing the reference. So that's why it's important to have one international benchmark. And the other one, is it designed for Australian market? It is designed for Australian market in terms of compliance, so the construction codes, all the requirements. But again, it will vary depending on the climate. So when we run the assessment, we always adjust the climate to make sure that it's relevant to that region. So that's if that answers your question, Pucha, if you could just please send us a chat, and I'll also send you the link with more details about how the benchmark is calculated. And you can also, when you log into the software, which is open, you just create an account, you can go through the benchmark and see all the assumptions. It's just the one I just showed now.
It's probably one of the most important things to get right when setting the policy, though, like what percentage saving against that benchmark you want to have. So as Nikki said, that roughly 4 tonne of carbon per person per year is this awesome international number that we then try and improve on. Ultimately, we want to get to we want to hit 0, because that's what the planet's ultimately going to be happy with. And the nice thing is carbon's a global problem. So if you emit carbon here, it's the same as emitting carbon in Copenhagen. It doesn't matter. So ultimately, within ETOOL, the only reason we have that benchmark is it's almost an abstract number of 4 tonne that we can then work down from and try and hit 0. In our mind, we don't really care. We just want to get you to 0. However, from a policy perspective, you need a number that helps you push a developer to get to a certain target. So, for instance, we have the same issue. If you put the building from Perth and you dumped it in Kununurra, it would automatically hit 50% saving. And they haven't done anything. Haven't done anything eco, but by default, because it's a hydropower grid, they've already knocked off all their operational carbon. So is that fair? Is that the right target if you're the local government in Kununurra speccing what the outcome should be. And I guess, I'd say no, you should push them harder, but that's when it comes down to whoever's setting the policy to have a chat and say, for instance, the city of Canning was really interesting. That's when we got to really explore those issues. The city of Vincent was a little bit faster, and it was like, right, we just need a number because we've got people coming in to just watch it be, and we went 50%. 50% is a good outcome, everyone's happy, and we're doing good things to the planet. City of Canning were like, right, let's be a bit more technical with this because, for instance, one thing we haven't talked about is it's far easier to take, say, a 2-story development and get it to zero carbon than it is to take a 15-story apartment building and get it to zero carbon. For a couple of obvious ones, one is 15-story buildings require a hell of a lot of materials and concrete, and car parks and air conditionings and common space, so that and then they've got no roof space to put solar hot water and solar PV. So if you push a developer who's doing 15 stories to zero carbon, they'll just walk away from it. They can't do it. Whereas a 2-story developer, they should be getting zero carbon, or they're not really thinking, or not trying. So we ended up with a sort of a not linear, but a bit of a sort of the higher you went, the softer the target became in percentage-wise. But it still was very challenging for the developer to hit it. So it's not quite as simple as saying, right, here's your benchmark, here's your target across the board. Each local government will end up having to think about it a little bit and saying, the other nice thing about the City of Canning too, we were saying, wow, that's a pretty hard target. Like, we know developers won't be happy, and they said, bugger it, for this region, we're going hard. We want to push them. So we put some pretty awesome targets on their regions in. Whereas in other areas, they're like, 4-star Green Star, we're okay with that, so let's just put 30% improvement on. But each one you kind of look at separately and come up with something. Obviously, when we go in there, we'll be pushing for zero carbon, but you have to have a bit of a think about it for each one.
That's good. Thanks all. While you explaining, I just sent the link on the benchmark as well, so people that are online have that reference. If anyone here would like to have a look at the benchmark, just send me an email or forward the link, or just Google E-Tool benchmark. There's a lot of documentation that we put online. Like what Alex is saying, it is what it is. The numbers, the results will flow through the software. It's the transparency is one of the greatest elements of the methodology, and that's all documented within the E-Tool process. What are the assumptions we use for the benchmark, and it's all documented on the website and the articles we write, always to inform what it is, just to make sure everyone understands it and we get good buildings at the end of the day. So just keep that in mind. Transparency is really important, and we are always trying to provide as much information as we can. If there's anything that you're not aware of or you haven't found, just let us know. We'll be promptly feeding that information back to you. So this is one example for how could a policy be set up for an area that different maximum allowable building height, and so we have the building height here on the left. The middle column is if you're applying for the density bonus, what would the target be? And if you're just applying for the standard benchmark or a compliant building, what would the target be? So, for example, a basic 1-story, if you want to exceed, you go 80% better than the benchmark. Or if you just want to get your building approval, you go 40% better than the benchmark. So that's already setting targets for standard planning policies. For example, beyond the building compliance, you start setting some performance targets for carbon, for example. It's a really progressive way of looking at it. And let's look at another example of 10-story building. So if you go in, or let's look at this one first, with 6-story building, it's a 50% improvement. So if you want to go beyond the limit, you go 50% improvement. And note that when you go, as the higher you go, the target reduce, but keep in mind that the higher you go, the harder it is to achieve an improvement, because usually you end up, after you optimize all your building, you end up with less roof space per apartment. So for a 20-story apartment, you're going to have a minimum space per apartment. So therefore, the solar PV allocation per apartment is small. And usually the solar PV is one of the biggest contributions. So we can set these variable targets depending on the building height.
Right, Enrique?
Yeah.
In reference to that, thing about the size of the roof relative to the building.
Yeah.
Are there, aside from the PVs that you can put on the roof, are there other factors that come into play? Because, I mean, there's a lot of people in urban design that are pushing for high-rise as a solution to urban sprawl and so on.
Yeah.
And there are other people like Christopher Alexander and co, pattern language, nature of order, etc., who say that we ought to be operating on about a 4-story limit with only occasional buildings going to 5 or 6. So, like from a because they say basically that people who live in buildings where when you look out the window you can't recognise the face of someone in the street, you then feel aloof from them, and creates a psychological detach.
Yeah.
And that happens about 4 or 5 stories. So I'm wondering if we can quantify a range of things about sustainability for building heights, that would be actually quite a useful tool in urban design.
It's a fascinating question, and it almost, because this is purely numbers, and this is a bit on a tangent, but unashamedly, life cycle design and life cycle assessment is purely numbers based, so it doesn't get social sustainability and the understanding of being removed from the people on the ground, but quite coincidentally.
I just think it's an interesting coincidence. But
so there is, like, we have a lot of, I was going to say arguments, internal discussion,
Philosophical
discussion on this very subject, because and probably back to the numbers things, is things like occupant transport. So this is purely looking at the building envelope and not, for instance, occupant transport. So if you have a building sitting next to a train station, you want to maximise the functionality of that space. So e-tool is, if you just look at the numbers here, e-tool would say, oh, that's not a good building because it's too high and you can't put the PV on and you can't. So no, you should squash it to 4. But if you included occupant transport, it would go, no, you've got to maximise the benefit of that train station and push the density up. So there are limitations, and like any design process there, you look at the numbers and then take a step back from the numbers and think, what about this social sustainability? What about the occupant transport and so on? How does that
even the occupant transport doesn't really stack up, because if you compare the urban densities of some places in Europe, like Holland or the areas around Copenhagen and so on, compare that to the urban density of a place like New York, who's got lots of people living in very tall buildings. The lower rise urban conglomerations perform better than the high rise ones.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think it's a really interesting component too.
Can I make a comment? I think I can totally agree with that question, and I love life cycle design, and I think as a developer it can really inform your decision making. I really like the fact that local councils are looking at it as a tool, but I can see some issues with using it, particularly because they want to use it it seems like often give density bonuses. And I'm not really sure whether density bonus is the right incentive. I would much rather see them to introduce this across the board for all their buildings, because this should be what we're building. There is too much really not so good design and development happening, which we need to cut out. Then I think for developments that are really well, you need to look at the numbers from life cycle assessment and then overlay it with lots of other factors that I think are really important too from a sustainability perspective. And incentives, I think, should not necessarily equal to just more stories, because I agree that I am concerned about the social and community aspects, which I think are very, very important from a community perspective. And that is something that, you know, as much as I see the value of life cycle assessment, is not something you can take into account. And you mentioned two things already, is how many toxins go into buildings, or, you know, what's the land use, how much open space have we got around it. I think you need to look at the whole picture. And I'm really, to just go for extra stories, no. I don't think that's necessarily the best outcome.
There might be two parts to that. One is the limitations of life cycle design. And yeah, look, we can't do social sustainability.
No.
And I think when we work with a local council, they don't just look at this and say, yeah, you get 2 stories. They will look at the overall performance of the building. But I think what we have to be very careful about is when we talk about sustainability in the pure sense of environmental, social and economic.
Yeah.
And if you want to talk social sustainability, you need the architects and the urban planners to have that conversation.
Yeah.
And don't let the engineer or the tick box or whatever it is say, this is sustainable because it points the right way, or it's got some barbecues, because that's not sustainability either. I agree, it totally takes both. And whenever we have discussions with local government, we say, this is the numbers. So if everyone lived like this on the planet, will the planet be destroyed? Yes or no? Okay, cool, tick that box. Yeah, that's okay. Now let's look at the social sustainability side of it. We can't do that. We're engineers, we're happy to admit that. So totally agree. Yeah. In terms of what they should be awarded with, or what the incentives are, look, I think that's a really challenging one. I mean, I remember with Alani and Tennant in the early days at St Vincent, and they're like, well, what do we give these people? If they're going to be better at it, what are the things that we can do to incentivise it? The obvious one is density bonus. If you're a developer, that's where you see value in. You're paying for a certain chunk of land, you want to maximise yield. What are some of the other things they can do? St Vincent, came up with a few clever things like builders on profile, so give them a bit of marketing value, give them a bit of time in the media as a result of creating a good building. But it's a challenging one. You can maybe cut red tape, but that's really fraught with issues, especially when you're already running a tough budget. And in a local, you can't say, well, you do this and we'll give you some money off. So it'd be good to find out if you had other ideas.
Well, for instance, one of the concerns that I've got with this potentially is what I see a lot is that, and it works, probably if you look at life cycle assessment, what works at the moment, if you put a certain amount of PV on, buildings to bring the carbon footprint down. Now, at the moment, a lot of those large residential projects are limited with how much they can do, with how much roof space they've got. I can see that in PV technology, we're going to see things that we do not see at the moment. And I saw something only the other day with, almost you can plug in something in your window to charge something, because there must be a little PV something on the other end.
Integrated, yeah.
So who knows? Our windows could be PV or whatever. So sky's the limit. And does that then mean that potentially policies that we're now putting in place, because we think it's limited, will mean that developers can just go up to a number of stories that because we've done this? I just think we need to look at that risk as well, because particularly because a lot of developers use the fact that higher is better. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. And I also think because councils put town planning schemes in place where you've set what the zoning is, which raises an expectation of people that are in those areas on what potentially could happen. And all of a sudden they're then faced, so everyone goes, okay, that's my town planning scheme. I know that what could happen around me is maybe 3-4 stories. And all of a sudden it may be design excellence. All of a sudden they go, shit, now it's 6 or 8. And I just think you've got to be very careful with that.
Look, I completely agree with you, but I don't think it's quite as broken as that. Just to give you a flip side, so this is just like life cycle assessment is just a tool, right? It doesn't replace the role of the planning department, right? The planning department is there to strategically think about it and assign height. and the density bonuses isn't an infinite scale, it's a strategic, planned out, okay, this is what you're allowed, and you're allowed 20% extra. You know, it's not you're allowed this, and if you hit that, you go unlimited. It's a controlled thing. So this is just one tool in the suite of things that the planning department of a local government would need to consider. I think the issue is, before this came along, you had nothing in this space.
Yeah.
Right? Now, certain local governments have put certain things in place which have their positives, they're moving in the right direction, but there's still a long way to go. So this is just filling a gap in that sustainability space. It's giving the planners a tool or a mechanism to use in the suite of other tools that they use, which is, you know, site setbacks, allowances, plot ratio, all of the various tools that they have. So it's, you know, it's important to remember that this isn't trying to replace that strategic planning stuff that the local council need to do. It's just another suite. It's basically putting something in place of something that doesn't exist at the moment. As in, it exists in very...
I mean, don't get me wrong, I see the benefits of it, and I can see, you know, that it's going to, you know, push for much better results. I think we just need to be careful with what kind of bonuses we're dangling in front of developers' noses, because I also know what makes them tick. And even though you've put some limitations on it as to when you will apply extra stories or things like that, I know that as soon as they get anywhere near, you know, reaching whatever you're dangling in front of them, that's what they'll want. Well, they'll already assume in their design, oh, well, if I do this, I'll get 2 extra stories. And even if they don't quite make it, that's exactly what they're negotiating for. So you just got to be very careful.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd agree with that, but I do know that local government set some pretty stringent limitations around how far they'll go and what they'll give to. So, you know, internally we're pretty careful around the incentives that we do dangle, and being very aware of where they sit in a precinct scale development or in a particular area, like the West End, for instance, for us. There are some pretty stringent rules and regs around how you can build in that, regardless of whether you hit particular targets. So local governments are pretty careful around what they'll allow in particular regions and areas, and we do need to have some incentives to offer. We have to, because otherwise developers will come back at us and say, well, you know, you're not giving us enough, we'll go and develop elsewhere. And for, say, somewhere like the city of Fremantle, which is actually quite dependent on its sort of local economic development, we can't afford for them to go elsewhere. So we have to give them the carrot.
In that sense, I would agree, and I've definitely experienced from my own experience that if you want to do the right thing, it's actually harder. So,
sometimes.
Absolutely, it takes longer, like everything else. So, in that sense, to be able to use some of this, you know, great, but
Let me just make one comment. I think I have 1 or 2 more slides to finish, and then we'll just open up to all the discussions, because we also got people online. Sorry guys, we only got 1 or 2 more slides to go, but we'll be right there with you to open up to some questions as well. What we found out is that the councils and different stages they are, depending on, you know, some of them are structuring the policy and looking at what we're discussing here. You know, how far can we go? What are the incentives? Some councils already have policies in place in that they are revising those policies and implementing, improving them. So it's a work in progress. It's a constant improvement. So that's what we're finding. You know, opportunities for us as designers to influence those policies. You know, they are changing, and they are on different. They're open to hear. That's what we've discovered. You know, we're always been welcome to go there and talk to them and show what we think would be a good building design. So that's just to highlight what E2 have been doing. We always approach the council prior to proposing using the methodology, but that's the idea. You know, not only saying this is right. You know, just hear from them, from their local experience, what is good from them, from their point of view. Looking at environmental sustainability, but of course considering the social sustainability as well and all the other criteria. So that's what we talked about and what Alex mentioned. It's important to get their point of view, not just enforce something on them. Look, always focusing on the mission that we're here to look after the planet and always push for better developments. Although we're working for the developers most of the time, we are here to get better buildings, and the councils they understand that, and that's why they've been so receptive for what we be talking to them. And then we go.
It's always important to talk to the council first before we get dragged in with the developer. I mean,
Exactly.
we often get really good developers. So, like in the city of Melville, they contacted us, and we went and stuck into the city of Melville without the developer there and tried to push the target as high as we could, and then you go back. But yeah, it's a nice thing to do is chat to them before you've got any developer knocking on the door. Get a chance to set those targets sort of independently, and then yeah, come back on the client being the developer side to get them there.
Yeah. I guess that's it. For those who haven't heard about E2 before, it's connected online. I think everyone here knows what we do. We're a consulting firm doing engineering and software for the environmental cause, and we've been doing this for almost 5 years now, since 2010, and we've completed over 200 LCAs studies on the built form, and we always push for zero carbon buildings. That's our mission. That's what we thrive on. So yeah, that's the end of the presentation. I'll leave it now up for us to discuss and get into the important part, which is getting everyone to put comments in, and yeah.
Right. Yeah, I have another question, a supplementary one to my previous one, Enrique.
Yeah.
And that has to do with solar access. One of the things that I'm keen on is the idea of every habitable space, whether it's an office space or an apartment or a house, being able to work with the local climate and not needing machines to make it work in terms of heating and cooling. Does LCA have the capacity to inform shires about doing urban design that facilitates solar access to every habitable space? John Ballinger and co at the solar people at the University of New South Wales some years ago published a book called Energy Efficient Subdivision Design. And they came up with an idea of shadow butterflies that are cast by one building, and then you build the next building out of the shadow of the next one, and so on. So everybody gets solar access at a 45 angle, so between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. basically, which enables passive solar design to work. Now, one of the biggest problem that architects have when working with passive design is overshadowing from other buildings. And at the moment, none of our local councils are regulating solar access. The R codes have a figure of a maximum of overshadowing of one block by the next of 25% on June 22nd. But it doesn't say which part of the block. You know, if the 25% happens to fall where your living area is only both. So there's no, like, it's kind of a tokenistic thing, and all, they've got their angle wrong anyway in the R codes. It's not actually the right angle for me to enter. They're giving people a 10 or 15% discount. So I'm just wondering, is there anything that can be used within LCA to try to steer local government and urban designers towards doing urban design that facilitates passive solar design?
Yeah, I'll try to answer the question, and then everyone feels free to complement. I think there's two elements. One is the environmental sustainability, and the other one is the social sustainability from the benefits of designing with the solar passive design concept. So sun is important, the energy, the sun, everyone feels good being on the sun, and it's important for our health. So those are the components that are not quantifiable on the life cycle design. We can't quantify, the pleasure of being, having a coffee on the sun, or, what benefits you have from having solar access to your property. Those are not quantifiable on the software or using the methodology, no. But what it does is it will, what Alex mentioned before, if we do build buildings like this across that development or across the world, will we damage the environment that we depend on? Will we damage the energy from the sun, and then we'll be able to have good living? Yes, that's what's included on the methodology. So in terms of solar access, that will improve thermal performance and energy use. Yes, that is quantifiable on the software. In terms of solar, the benefits of using solar design for the social aspects and thermal comfort and the benefits of having the sun access, no. So, that's the balance that we talked about. How can we look at what if we design buildings that have solar access, but then we don't get, we compromise the environment on the other side of things. We don't get the benefit of having higher density because of the public transportation that we got close by and so on. So again, you have to look at the numbers and step out and then look at the social aspects. It's a combination until we can quantify the social elements and put them into the methodology. So it's a tricky one.
There are people that try and do it, life cycle, the social sustainability life cycle assessment, but it's a really heated debate and presents very controversial data, because what it will tell you here in Australia is, get over yourselves, our quality of life here is awesome. So when you build something, social sustainability is already there. You live in a fantastic place, a fantastic climate. In terms of the percentage that influences your well-being, it's not major. What it will tell you, though, is if you use materials from a certain country where they're exploiting a certain population to create that material for you, then you're really having a problem. So it often gives you things you don't want to hear, but highlights elements that are really positive and can really help us design well. But yeah, very controversial in some circles. But what I wanted to ask after that conversation was, we had a session like this a few months ago on what will help us become more sustainable in terms of the property developers or anything, and it was, should it be regulatory approach, like setting high targets and hitting people to do it? Should it be incentive based, so providing them incentives, or market based approach? How do you encourage people to do it because you can sell it better and therefore have a better outcome? In your opinion, do you have ideas for local government and policymakers other than density bonuses that might help push this along?
What always strikes me is that, and we do most in medium density kind of sphere, so not the high-res stuff. Very much the townhouse style developments, that kind of thing. There is, most people that I speak to really, really, really dislike what is currently happening. That is people that are in the market to buy these things. That is the people that work in local government. And I just do not understand why we cannot change the planning framework to stamp that kind of development out. Because if that is so much what we don't like and don't want to see, at the same time, it's the stuff that complies, ticks all the boxes, and absolutely races through the system. So let's have the conversation about what is it that we don't like about it and why does it comply. So what do we have to change in the planning framework to just change that?
Understanding where it sits in the planning framework and who can actually change that, because unfortunately in most of these cases it's not local government. We can advocate, we can push, but in terms of actually changing the codings and the wording.
So for instance, what I think is a really big one is what we tend to do, and it's happening everywhere, and I think it's just happened in a lot of the suburbs, is we rezone. So we have a lot of areas that are zoned R17 and a half and R20, and then we rezone it only slightly and it goes up to R40. And what that does is get you very typical townhouse type development that no one likes, or the battle axe development or stuff like that. Just don't rezone. Because the other thing is you get one does redevelop and the other one doesn't, and you get an absolute mismatch. So really have a look, and that is a local council thing. Have a look at your town planning scheme, and if you don't want to see that type of outcome, then don't rezone. Keep it as it is, and really, and it means you're looking at the detail, but have a look at where you would rezone, and then look at what you would potentially do at those blocks. I'm not saying they need to go up to R100 and above, but maybe an R60, R80 could have really good outcomes, but you need to find the right locations.
Do you think it's I know this is planning discussion obviously, but do you think it's also potentially driven by market? So the thing is, like, the product may not be ideal from a planning perspective or from a sustainability perspective, but we're not seeing reams of empty apartment buildings. The product is selling, and I guess developers inherently they develop a product that they're trying to meet the market demand kind of thing. So in terms of going to a smaller size and all that kind of thing, I'm not saying it's the right solution. It's just an observation, I guess, is that we've seen sizes of houses come down. We've seen high-rise product go up, and we're seeing more and more of it because that's the thing that's going out the door. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so is it a malicious attempt by a developer, or are they just responding to market drivers because people can only afford that?
Affordability issues, yeah.
I think it's
agree with you more. I think the market aspect is a huge component to it. And also, when we go through different stages in life, there are a different product that you want. And whilst one person in a particular demographic, in a particular area, in a particular location wants this, because that's all they've known, when we broaden that out and look at the whole community, there's a lot of difference in the type of product that they want. And
I think we've also just gone through a really big boom where people just buy whatever is available on the market. So I find, whether the market, that there has not been any other choice. So people just buy what's there. They want to have a roof over their head, they buy what's affordable. I think from a developer's perspective, with my experience, I can totally see why they're pumping out what they do, because that's what's easy, that's what complies, that's what makes the money. If you change the rules, they will actually come up with different kind of products because they'll have to adapt. But at the moment, they play by the rule, and anyone that wants to do something that's different and that's alternative, probably more sustainable, will have a really, really hard time and probably go, I don't think I'll ever do this again because it's too hard. So, and that's where I think the planning framework does have a lot to answer for. And it's very simple things where it blows me away that if there's a lot of science about that black roofs in Perth are not great, and that a light coloured roof is a whole lot better. Why can't we, for something that almost is so black and white, why can't we use the legislation to just go, we just won't accept that anymore? Why is it that in so-called sustainable greenfield developments with all those green credentials, if you would look around and you look at the percentage of homes that still have a black roof, you just go, why? How is that possible? So I think we just need to, I don't think you can really blame the developers. They play by the rule. I don't think you can blame the market because they just buy what's there. I think we need to look at what's the rules.
On that very point, I asked our thermal assessors precisely the same question. And do you know the response I got?
Doesn't matter.
It actually gets more brownie points in winter.
It depends what you're using to heat your house with. If you're using an electric bar heater, then yeah, you're better off with a black roof. But if you're using a high efficiency wood pellet heater, then go for a light coloured roof, so offset your summertime though. But yeah, that's not a huge one. But you're on the point though, which was like, so that I agree, like I'd love to see regulation increased and just said that, but I also really am not a big fan of regulation. I think we should be pushing market-based approaches and incentive-based approaches, because whenever you see regulatory approaches, and we had a debate a year ago, I don't know if you came to that one, Ollie, who's from England, I should bring him into here because he said that the regulatory approach is going to fix everything. We had old mate from the Property Council who said incentives will fix everything because he's obviously the Property Council, he wants government to give more money to the developers to build better. And I was arguing on the market-based approach. Interestingly, the UK have pulled back their 2020 target for zero carbon homes because they set these benchmarks and then government changes and they have a problem and they pull out. So I think while I do very strongly support raising the bar, that's great, but I still would like to know what can we do to go further, because when you set this, what you find is developers will do everything they can to just get over it or sneak in underneath it. So to my mind, that's not a good outcome. Whereas if you set incentive-based and market-based approaches, they start clambering over each other to say, well, I'm more sustainable because look, I'm doing this.
Yeah.
Oh, and I'm even more sustainable because I'm doing that. And that's when you get innovation and progression. Whereas I do fear, like star rating is a perfect example, NatPers. Great, we got 6-star. What's happened is all the developers have worked out how to sneak past it. And they use different ways. There's the deep
reference building, yeah.
And the reference building, and you look back at it and you're like, what have we achieved apart from a bunch of really cunning NatPers assessors and project builders? Because it was said, you must do this and I'll hit you on the head if you don't, as opposed to saying, hey, let's run a huge marketing campaign Australia-wide to tell everyone why a good solar passive design house is the best thing for you to live in. I guarantee if they'd done that, every mum and dad would have been asking their builder, be it Dale Alcock, BGC or Gerard, what are you doing to improve my thermal performance? And we would be light years ahead of where we are. So I think you've got to be careful you don't push too strongly on regulatory.
I think it needs all three, Alex. Like,
I think
the
so too.
situation in Western Europe, I mean, Germany has got a law that's starting, I think, right about now, where you're not allowed in Germany to use any energy, whether it's from your own PVs or from the grid, to heat or cool your building. Right? It's just illegal. Yeah. You have to design the building envelope to cope. Now, Germany's not a warm place. So if they can achieve zero energy for thermal comfort in Germany, we should walk it in here, but we don't. So I think having a regulation like that makes sense. It doesn't tell you how to do it. It just says you can't use any energy for heating and cooling, full stop. And the houses in Vauban, where that tram line is near Freiburg, all those apartments are already designed that way. So it's perfectly possible. The technology is known. The thing about developers and government rules and stuff like that is you need to be aware that in Australia, the Housing Industry Association represents around 250,000 individual members. The Institute of Architects represents 11,000. When there's a regulation brought in like 6-star, the Housing Industry Association gets involved with things like the Australian standards and stuff and pushes for whatever the builders want. And what the builders want is to be able to do tomorrow what they did yesterday. And so they will push for what they did yesterday to be allowed under the deemed to satisfy, whether it actually performs or not. So the DTS is used as a way of escaping the regulation. It's not a way of complying with the regulation.
That's the problem with regulations.
But no, it's not the problem with regulations. It's the problem with vested interests corrupting the regulations.
But if you said to a builder, you will make more money if you improve the thermal performance, you build that, I'll do it tomorrow.
I'm not disagreeing with that. But, it's like having safety standards in motor cars. When the seatbelt was introduced, General Motors and Ford were putting ads in the media about how people weren't going to be able to afford a car anymore. When the 1.5 stars was being introduced, the HIA was saying that West Australians would no longer be able to afford to build a house. As the star ratings went up, they actually built more houses. People didn't stop.
But the way they countered that in the seatbelt was to counter it with good marketing. Put a seatbelt on and save a child's life. Bang, everyone wants a seatbelt. Bang, all the car manufacturers are now promoting how safe their cars are. But if you try and hit on the head again, you'll have resistance. You've got to lead from the front.
I think it needs both. I really do. I think it
I'm
needs.
still in debating mode with Ollie, so, but yeah, I agree. At the end of it, I agree, totally
And in
requires.
terms of the zonings that Jenny was talking about with reference to councils, it's very, very simple. You draw a 400-metre radius around your railway stations, and you let people build maximum density in there, and then you graduate away so that by the time you're not within walking distance, you're back to the status quo. And the only places in Perth where we now ought to be doing densification of our urban areas is within that walking radius of our railway stations and or tram lines when we're down. We shouldn't be doing it anywhere else. You know, we have situations now in places like Big Park and so on where we're doing fairly high density developments in places that, yeah, okay, you can walk to a cafe or to a park, but if you want to go anywhere, you've got to get in your car. And all we're doing is creating urban structures that are going to be dysfunctional for generations. Every time we underdevelop a site that's in a good location near a railway station or something, we're locking that population in for 40 or 50 or 60 years into a dysfunctional urban structure. We need to be thinking about what sort of a city do we need in 2050, and that's the regulations we need to apply now. That's what we rely on local government to do, not what works today that the butcher, the baker and a candlestick maker might want the council to do, but what's responsible planning about. And from an urban design point of view, we've got to abandon the sprawl. We've got to let some of those places just go, stop servicing them like they do in Detroit, and focus back on where we need the population to be. De-incentivise the sprawl, incentivise the consolidation, not in the sense of blanket density, but in the sense of urban amenity, you know, good walkable living environment.
So in certain circumstances, you would support incentivising density?
I would support incentivising density in the places where we want it, but I would de-incentivise it elsewhere. I wouldn't outlaw it, I just wouldn't provide any incentives, and I would actually do what some of the governments in some parts of the world have done when sprawl has gotten to the point where they can't sustain it, of actually withdrawing government services from areas that are not sustainable. Because the only way you'll ever contain the sprawl of a place like Perth is to do that. At the moment, the government's policy is 57% greenfield or 53% greenfield and 47%.
In the Perth field, at 3.5 million, their third option is 70% greenfields.
Yeah, well, that's pushed back up again. Well, because that's
70%, 70-30. That's ludicrous. I mean, that is, to me, that is just business as usual. It's a feel good thing.
It was 53-47. It was 53-47, but that
you're
hasn't
trying
been
to achieve though, and local government as well, like try and find the logical spots for increasing density and incentivise it, and where it's not, encourage, try and
yes, that, I mean, I think that actually depends on the local government and where it is. Your peri-urbans are a little bit less focused on that because they're focused on their own economic development. So you might see you want to raise your Joondalups looking at this very differently to say a very urban area like Freddie or the city of Perth, because they obviously have they already have incentives to use themselves as transit hubs, and for people to come to the city and to be able to get around the city on their feet because we want them to do that.
The sad thing
But
about
the
it is,
peri-urbans are different.
And what's the biggest challenge then when you're sitting between the developer and the locals to getting that right? Like where you've got some
In Freo, it's heritage. In Freo, it's the argument
you've got another
between
challenge.
between the we don't want to lose our amazing heritage precinct, so therefore we don't want to densify that area because we don't think those two kinds of building envelopes are compatible. So there's a little bit of that sort of argy-bargy around, but even so, there's still a lot of I guess a lot of force behind the densification around the transit-oriented hubs and that kind of stuff. So that for Freo is not really, it's not big for us because it's not big news for us. Freo's been trying to do it for years, but we see in the context of the Ellenbrooks and the different areas where you sort of go, well, that's evidently not what all of local government's about at the moment.
Yeah.
The fringe local governments are missing the boat though, because if they were to incentivise private-public joint ventures to introduce light rail and dedicated busways and so on, they could actually achieve similar densities. And in fact, if you think about it realistically, in our peri-urban areas, an urban like what you find in places like Holland, where you have dense villages and then open space, that would preserve the integrity of those peri-urban areas. All of those qualities that people like about living there would still be there, because you'd have the high density around the transport node, the town centre, and then it would fade out, and you could still have the peri-urban lifestyle, but then these people would have hubs they could come to. That
The
would be
barrier there is simply cash. Local governments don't have that kind of cash to incentivise things like
No,
that.
they don't need the cash. They don't need the cash. The money comes from the value capture of the change of the land use. Like for instance, in Seattle, when they, and ditto in Portland, when they built the tram line, all of the land along the tram line became more valuable because people could have access. So they taxed capital gain at 1.5%, which is bugger all, and that paid for the tram line.
In the sense that there was some kind of capital injection before that happened?
Well, there was an investment. There was investments and borrowings made to build the tram line, and then the value capture was applied to all the land along the tram line.
That's where our legislation would have to change to make allowance.
Yeah,
but
I
if it
realise
did,
that,
we
but
could
the tools already exist, and
That requires the government, I think, slightly more than 4 years.
I mean,
That would require a government that can think a little bit more than 4 years ahead, though, to go, yeah, we'll realise.
There's one other thing, and that is that in the peri-urban areas, the land bankers are relying on tripling the supply of land to the public in order to keep the prices high. And at the moment, the state government, through various means, we, the taxpayer, through various means, subsidise every block of land to the tune of, $85,000. I think it's probably even more than that if you measure it realistically. But the developer takes the profit of that, the public doesn't. So what we're doing is we are incentivising developers to promote sprawl, and we're not incentivising people in the urban areas where we're doing the densification. So it just doesn't stack up economically for a developer to take the kind of risks to do urban infill when they can make that much money on the outskirts. We have to change that equation. We really do.
It's actually quite expensive to do urban